Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Marion Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to learn and grow together? Then let's get started. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to Episode 4 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we're heading over to Scotland to talk to Kirsty Wilkinson, who specializes in Scottish records and paleography. Kirsty, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Hi, Marion. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Let's get started by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Okay, well, I'm 35. I'm originally from Malvern in Worcestershire, which is in the middle of England, but I've been living in Edinburgh, Scotland for about 15 years. I've been working as a professional genealogist since 2006, and I now work full-time in genealogy. My company is My Ain Folk, which is a Scots phrase meaning my own people. It comes from an old song about Scots emigrants remembering their family back home. I primarily carry out Scottish research, and I think Edinburgh is possibly one of the best places in the world to be a genealogist, not only because we have wonderful records access, but because there's so many different repositories within the centre of the city and all within kind of walking distance of one another, so there's really like a really broad range of records that I can access right here.
So do you live right downtown so that you can just like fall out of bed and walk to these archives?
Well, technically, if I'm feeling energetic, I could walk. More likely, I'll get the bus. But for me, it's about a 30-minute walk to the sort of the centre and the main record offices. Oh,
that sounds perfect. So you walk for 15 minutes, you stop, you have a cup of coffee, you keep going. Sounds like a perfect situation.
Yeah, Edinburgh's one of those cities that the easiest way to get around is often just walking. So yeah, it's good for that.
So what inspired you to become a genealogy professional?
Well, like most people, I began by researching my own family. Although I'm English, I have Scottish ancestry, which is how I got into it in the first place. I just quickly moved from a hobby to sort of the obsession and reading every book and magazine I could get my hands on. And I think it was probably originally my mum that suggested that I could do this professionally, because before then I'd never really thought about being self-employed. But then it was just like, oh, maybe I could do that, maybe there is actually a career in it for me.
So when she said that to you, did you think, I should go check out and see if this is a possibility? And then you started to look into it?
Yeah, really. I mean, I sort of started looking into a bit more the educational opportunities and the business side of things, just to see if there was actually something that I could do and make a job out of it, really.
Were you doing something else professionally before you became a genealogy professional?
Well, I would say before genealogy, I had jobs to pay the bills, but I didn't really have a career or a profession as such. So, I was quite young when I started, kind of in my mid-20s, so I'm probably slightly unusual for that in that I didn't come from a different background, really.
Well, that's true. You are one of the youngest professional genealogists I guess I've talked to. Wow. And you've been doing this for quite a while, so that's 7 years at least. Actually, we started about the same time.
Oh.
So what did you do to prepare yourself to become a genealogy professional, both from an educational point of view and from a business skill point of view?
Well, I started taking some business classes. I was quite lucky that when I started, because I was young, I actually qualified for sort of free help for young people setting up in business. So that was quite useful. Although it took me a few years to actually do it, but I was able to attend some business classes and learn basic bookkeeping, that kind of thing. So that was very useful. On the genealogy side, I took short courses, and I took a course in reading old Scottish handwriting, which has been really useful. And that's sort of one of the areas I started up with. Then gradually, since working professionally, I've sort of continued very much with the education, most recently I've just graduated with a MSc in genealogical studies from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow.
How long did that program take, and was that an on-site program or an online program?
It's an online program. It's divided into 3 years. So the way I did it was I did 2 years and I took a break and then I went back to it. But during that break, I was actually part of a ProGen study group, so it wasn't a complete break from the education, really.
When you were in that program, I don't know anything about that program, so this is why I'm curious. How many classes would you just take one class at a time, or do you have multiple classes simultaneously?
No, I mean, it's basically set up as quite an intensive course. So there's several deadlines every month, and I think they reckon it's about 20 hours a week studying.
So even though you said that you only had some jobs before, not really a career, I'm sure that you had skills that you had developed prior to going to business as a genealogist. What skills did you have that you brought to your business that helped you out?
Well, the kind of jobs I'd done before were administration type jobs. So, of course, that's useful, for starting up a business. I'd say most of what I had when I started was lots of enthusiasm and a thirst for knowledge and an awareness of how much I had to learn. So I was quite happy to start in a very small way and then gradually build up the business over the years as my knowledge and my skills grew.
Did you have any glaring gaps in your skill, that you knew you had to rectify right away? Business skills that you just had to learn specific. You had said you'd done a business course, but what kind of things did you have to learn to be able to properly set yourself up in business?
I guess the bookkeeping side of it, that was quite new to me. In a lot of ways in the UK, becoming self-employed is relatively simple and straightforward. You fill in one simple form and you do your tax return once a year, and pretty much you're not bothered very much apart from that.
Right. What about the whole issue of clients? I know a lot of new genealogists struggle with, where do you get clients from? Were you shy at all about talking to people, tell people this is what I do for work, I'm always looking for clients? How did you approach this issue?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I had a website and I advertised in quite a few magazines, but I didn't know really many other professional genealogists at all. So I think that's something I've gradually over the years realized the importance of, and networking. And I'd say that now networking and meeting other genealogists and getting business through that is actually quite a large part of my business and where my work comes from. But it's probably took me a little while to realize that and to get the most out of that.
So are you networking with other genealogists in Scotland, in the UK, or just internationally through the internet?
A bit of all of those, really. I'm part of a group in Scotland called the Scottish Genealogy Network, which is an informal group of people working in the genealogy industry, and we meet up once a month, and we often visit an archive, and usually afterwards we'll go to the pub and have a great chat and, really talk over issues that we're having and keep up to date with all the news. But I'm also know quite a lot of other professional genealogists in England. The last few years I've been going to the Who Do You Think You Are show, and that's a great opportunity to catch up with people that maybe you don't see for the rest of the year.
Is the main focus of your trip to Who Do You Think You Are, is it for networking or is it for education? Mainly for the networking.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is some, obviously, educationals, and there's a whole range of talks that are going on there, but a lot of it is quite aimed at the beginner or intermediate, so probably that side of it isn't so useful for me. But yeah, it's really the networking and getting the chance to catch up with so many people and meet lots of people that maybe I know a little bit through the internet but hadn't met in person before.
When you go down there to London, do you also spend a little bit of time researching at the same time?
Well, I've always intended to do that, but then it gets quite difficult to take that time away from the business. So I haven't really done a whole lot of research when I've been down there, but I'm actually getting a little more time when I go next year, so I'm hoping I might actually manage a little bit of research then.
What was the hardest part of starting a genealogy business for you?
I think the hardest part is just actually taking the plunge and doing it and getting the business started. I thought about it for several years before I actually did it, and it was just a change in circumstances that made me think, it's now or never, I've got nothing to lose and I should just go for it.
Did you jump right in doing full-time, or did you kind of ease in with part-time?
I started part-time. I had a part-time job to pay the bills and did the business sort of on the side, and gradually been able to build it up to the point where a few years ago I was able to stop the part-time job completely.
So how many years do you say you did part-time before you went full-time?
It's a good question. Maybe 4 years, I think, yeah.
And so how scary was that for you when you took that plunge and you said, okay, this is it, I'm going full-time now?
It was quite scary. It was when I was quite in-depth with doing the Strathclyde course at the time. So it was just during the course 20 hours a week, doing a job 20 hours a week and managing a business which was growing. It was just became impossible. So it was like something's got to give. And at that point, I just said, right, enough is enough. I've got to quit the job and do the genealogy full-time.
That's so funny. That was the right decision, but I mean, people don't
usually... It was the right decision. I would say, looking at the situation financially, it might not have seemed that was the most sensible thing to do. But luckily, I have a very supportive partner. So when I said to him, look, this is what I want to do, and okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover the bills, but I'm going crazy, and this is what I want to do. And he just said, yes, do it. So I'm very lucky.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's much easier when you have somebody supporting you in your goals. So that's great that you had that. Yeah. Can you share a story of an obstacle you encountered, a specific obstacle you encountered early in your career and how you worked around it?
I don't know if it's an obstacle as such, but as you mentioned, I'm quite young to be a genealogist. And so I think when I started, I was very aware that I was young and, there's maybe a perception within the genealogy industry in the UK that it's a nice little job for someone who's semi-retired and just wants to top up the pension, but it's not really a career for someone who's young and a mortgage to pay and all that. So I think that kind of knowledge that I was young and less experienced has really sort of pushed me and made me go after the qualifications and professional memberships and that kind of thing. So although in some ways it could have been an obstacle, it's actually been a benefit to me, I think. I said it's really pushed me to work hard and to prove myself.
Do you think that you have managed to change at least the perception about yourself?
Hopefully. I mean, I think like with a lot of younger genealogists, when we start out, we think we're the only one, but then you gradually realize that there are quite a lot of us. And I certainly know of one professional genealogist who started even younger than I did. So I think there's a few of us out there.
Tell us about that moment in your business when everything started to come together and you became really confident about where you were heading.
I don't know if there's been one big moment, but rather it's kind of a series of small moments when I felt like, okay, this is actually beginning to get somewhere. So certainly, as I mentioned, the time when I quit the part-time job to do the genealogy full-time, I think that first moment when you actually turn down some work because you're too busy, becoming a member of the Association of Scottish Genealogists and Researchers and Archives, that was quite a big moment. I felt like, okay, I've proved myself just to get to the point where I could actually just apply.
What is involved in joining that organization? Do you have to qualify to be a member? Or how do you get in?
Where you submit samples of your work. So it's probably a combination of submitting samples of work and partly the qualification at Strathclyde, and also at that point I had the experience of having worked professionally for a few years. So it's a combination of those.
And what's the benefit once you are a member of the organization? I'm familiar with the Association of Professional Genealogists, and they have a directory of members, and people can go there to, find a researcher that will fit with them. Is it the same kind of thing? Are they helping promote you?
It's the same. It's a website where I have an individual listing. And so a lot of my work now comes through inquiries through that website. So it's been very useful to me in that way.
What were some of the services that you offered, let's say, when you started, part-time, and how has that changed compared to what you're offering now?
Well, initially, one of the things I offered was the Paleography service, so transcribing the old Scots and English documents. Although I sort of soon discovered that there wasn't going to be that much work in that, so I expanded into more general research. And as I've got more experience, I've maybe begun to specialize a bit more, and I mainly do sort of problem solving or brick wall kind of research for people who've already done a lot of work for themselves. I also do some heir tracing research, which I got into when I was approached by a company who were looking for someone in Edinburgh. So having got a little bit of experience through that, I now am able to offer that as a service, and I do that kind of work for a few different companies, and also done some work directly for solicitors and the executors of estates.
Are you also offering the service of locating living persons?
I do, yes. So that's sort of grown out of that kind of legal research. So I do that sometimes for private clients. Say that it's quite a small part of my business, but I do sometimes get asked to do that for people, yeah.
How much of your business is, just like a percentage, I don't need like exact figures, UK-based clients versus, say, Americans who are trying to research their ancestry?
I would say it's predominantly from the UK, but it tends to be more England than Scotland, and I also get quite a lot of work from Australia and New Zealand, and a little from Canada, and some American clients, but I wouldn't say I get a huge number of American clients.
So when somebody contacts you from Australia or New Zealand, do you know how they're connecting with you? Are they finding you from your website?
I do advertise in one Australian magazine, and I know that advert gets me quite a lot of work from that particular market, so that works quite well for me.
Gosh, you're very proactive with that. That's excellent. Wow, I'm so impressed. You're advertising in Australia. That's cool.
But obviously, it's a country that has a lot of people who have come from the UK, particularly from Scotland, and often they're very keen on connecting with their Scottish heritage and their Scottish identity. So it's actually quite a good market to go after.
Interesting. Do you offer any unique services that differentiate you from other researchers in Scotland or in the UK?
I don't know if what I do is unique, but I guess I'm able to offer quite a broad range than some other researchers, basically because I have the ability to read the old writing and to do the modern research and locate the living people. So that gives me quite a broad range. And because everything is pretty much on my doorstep, I'm able to do lots of kind of small searches or lookups because I don't have to charge for travel and I don't necessarily have to wait till I have a lot of work to do at a particular repository. I can just go there and spend an hour or whatever and then go on somewhere else.
Which specialty area that you have do you think required the most education? Would it have been the paleography?
Yeah, obviously it's a very specific skill, and so I did a course specially for that, and it's been a lot of practice. I'm actually currently doing a Latin course because I'd like to improve my Latin so I can tackle a few more older documents. Although in Scotland we're quite lucky that most documents tend to be written in Scots rather than Latin, although there are particular kinds of documents that were generally written in Latin.
When you say that it's written in Scots, what do you mean? That it's like written in Celtic? Or
No, the Scots language, it's similar to English, but it has specific words and specific grammar, and particularly very specific legal terms that you find in Scotland that you don't find in England. So the documents look quite different, and they have sort of, the language is quite different. So it's kind of have to learn that.
What time period are we talking about with the Scots language?
Well, the sort of earliest period I would do is probably the late 1500s and through to the early 1700s, which is when Scotland and England were joined, and then the documents become more English after that.
Is there any remnants of this Scots language that still bubbles to the surface in the way people talk in Edinburgh or in Scotland?
Definitely. Obviously, I don't have that accent because I'm not originally from Scotland. But yeah, there's certainly words that I'll have come across in the older documents that I'll actually hear people using. Although, obviously, because it's mainly legal documents I'm looking at, it's a particular kind of language. It's not necessarily the language that people would use in everyday speech.
So a lot of genealogists offer a wide array of services in addition to client research, such as in writing and speaking. What do you do? Do you do just client research, or do you also write articles? Do you do public speaking?
No, it's really just the client research at the moment. I said I do some work for private clients and some for a few different companies that I work for semi-regularly. I do think it's important to diversify, and I would like to get into doing more writing, but I think for the last few years, because I've been concentrating on the education side, I just haven't really felt the time to do that.
So have you wrapped up the education aspect of it yet? Or
Well, no, I think it's always ongoing. As I said, I'm currently studying Latin, which is the thing I'm doing at the moment. But yeah, I think that's always going to be there in the background because it's so important to, keep up your skills and your knowledge.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, that's the right thing to say as a genealogist. You have to do that. So are you finding that you're too busy with your client research, or are you really just kind of saying, I'm feeling a little squeamish in my stomach. I don't really want to stand up in front of people and talk?
I'd say I'm probably not a natural public speaker, so the writing would appeal to me more than the speaking, but never say never. If an opportunity came up, then it might be something I'd try out.
Anything can be learned. You don't have to be naturally comfortable with anything to learn how to do it. So you could become a great public speaker.
Well, that's true, and I think it is important to be open to opportunities. As I said, with the legal research, that's not something I would have thought of doing until I was approached. And then I thought, well, why not? Sort of you can learn the skills and get better at it and build up a new area of your business.
With that legal research, was that a UK firm that contacted you or an American firm?
That was a UK firm based in England. So it's what's here is called the Treasury Solicitor in England, who administers cases when people die intestate with no known heirs. So that was the initial work that I did, which people in the UK will know through the TV program Heir Hunters.
So since that experience, after you got your feet wet with that and you got some experience, have you since then taken the opportunity to network a bit with the legal community in Edinburgh to try to proactively develop that work a bit more? I
haven't actually, which would probably be a good idea. I mean, I've always sort of been approached by other people. I mean, I do list it as one of my services on my website and on various listings. But no, I've never particularly sought out that kind of work.
Is there anything that you've done, because it sounds like you've been really lucky so far with people who've contacted you, have you ever made yourself really uncomfortable by putting yourself out there, doing something new or approaching somebody and you didn't know what they were going to say? I know you did the advertising in Australia, but that's not really risky because you just call up the publication and place your ad.
No, I don't know that there's anything I've done that I'd say I've really taken a big risk. I think I've just sort of been lucky, I said, partly because of where I live and the wide amount of research that's possible. And, I've concentrated mainly on online advertising and being a member of various organizations. I'm in the APG as well. And I think through that, I've got my name out there and through the social media as well. So I think through that, I've sort of made myself known and the work has generally come to me.
Right, so that's your action item for this show. By the end of next year, I want you to do something uncomfortable. Maybe it should be public speaking.
I'll give it some thought.
Okay, that's all I can ask. How do you balance paid work versus volunteering?
Well, I'm not heavily involved in volunteering, partly because I have approached a couple of organizations and they've never been taking on anyone. So I do some transcribing. I've done some from Family Search, and it's a project that's just starting up to transcribe some Scottish poor relief records that I'm involved with. And I also have my own transcription project on the go, which has grown out of my master's for the genealogy course. So I'm transcribing some records for that, which I'm hoping to eventually get published in some form, though I'm not exactly sure yet what that will be.
Nice. So those poor records that you mentioned, was that was the Family Search project?
No, that's actually from one of the local archives here in Scotland.
Oh, okay, great.
And it was quite funny that they advertised a talk about these records, and I thought, oh, that'd be really interesting. So I went along to the talk, and it was really just a bit of a ploy to get people there to sign up for this project, which obviously worked on me.
Oh, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Anybody who works for an organization, if you're listening, that was a perfect ploy.
Yes, and they also had free wine and sort of food and things at this talk. So obviously that got lots of people into the talk. And then, you're through the door and they say, oh, write down your email address, so we can contact you. And so before you knew it, you kind of sign up. But I do think it's a worthwhile project. Clearly,
they have a different way of doing things in the UK. We need to change things up here a little bit.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I think a lot of developments in the UK genealogy field start off with a conversation in the pub. That does seem to be quite a common theme, I've discovered.
What is the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you can share with us?
Well, I don't know about fun, but probably one of the most interesting was an heir tracing case for an intestate estate, which involved a family of Scottish travellers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And they had a very common Scottish name. And you would look at the birth record, and the place of birth would be something like in a tent by the side of the road. And so, that's quite a challenge when you're trying to trace this family. So it was a lot of work, and they moved obviously quite frequently. So it was just absolutely methodical searches, going through hundreds and hundreds of birth records to locate all the children of this family. And eventually I did, and I traced them all to the present day. So it was a lot of work, but it was, the satisfaction of a job well done at the end of it.
Very cool. Can you describe what you mean by Scottish travelers? I think I have a sense of what you're talking about, but here in the States, we don't have the same thing with the travelers as you do over there in Europe.
Yeah, well, I call them Scottish travellers because it's a different group from, like, the Romany gypsies. So basically, Scottish people who several centuries ago had sort of taken to a life on the road, and then that's passed down through several generations. And so they became quite a distinct community, and there's various different groups within Scotland.
And are they still a community existing in Scotland today?
Well, certainly this family that I researched, sort of by the mid-20th century, they'd all settled down, and so they're no longer a travelling family. But I think that there are some groups that are sort of still identify in Scotland.
Interesting. And I don't think we have groups like that in the United States, or if we do, they're not really talked about quite in the same way as they are in Europe.
Yeah, well, I think I work with another firm, but when she had spoken to some of the descendants, they weren't very keen to admit this. So I think there was still a bit of a stigma attached to it. And they didn't necessarily want to admit that their grandmother had been born in a tent by the side of the road.
Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hello, this is Kimberly Powell, President-elect of the Association of Professional Genealogists. APG is an international membership organization dedicated to supporting all individuals in the business of genealogy, whether you're an archivist, librarian, educator, writer, or researcher. Our 2,600 members include genealogists at all stages of their professional careers, from those just starting out to some of the field's most renowned leaders. Learn how to grow your business and network with other professionals through our educational webinars, informal mentoring groups, active discussion lists, the APG Quarterly, and our annual Professional Management Conference. Visit us online at apgen.org to learn how we can help you on your professional journey and how you can help us advance public awareness and understanding of the profession of genealogy.
Okay, Kirsty, we are going to enter the lightning round. I'm going to bombard you with a bunch of questions related to genealogy and business, and you're going to come back with all this great, useful advice for all the genealogists out there. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
I'd say not making any money and having to give up and go find a real job.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
The job you want doesn't exist and you have to go create it.
Oh, nice. What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
Well, there's a chapter in the Professional Genealogy book on setting realistic fees, which has a formula on how to determine your hourly fee. I'm sure you can find similar things elsewhere. So I would suggest that anyone who's starting up should sit down and work out, how much they could realistically make. And I think that would maybe come as a bit of a reality check to a lot of people. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to sort of face what the reality is and how much money you're likely to make.
Is there a sort of going rate for genealogy services either in your area or in Scotland in general?
It varies quite a lot depending on experience and where you live. Generally, people in Edinburgh would charge a little bit more than people who live other parts of Scotland, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Do you have a productivity tool like Dropbox that you love and that you can share with the audience?
Well, I do use Dropbox occasionally, but I'm actually quite low-tech in some ways, and I just like very simple word processing spreadsheets where I can just see everything in front of me and lists and that kind of thing. So I'm not super into the technology.
What is your preferred social media channel?
Well, that's definitely Twitter. So, because it fits so well into my life, I have Twitter on my phone, so I can tweet on the bus or, in a lunch break and say, oh, I found something really interesting, or ask a question. So I do have a blog that's rather neglected, and I have a Facebook page that's also rather neglected. But I think Twitter is the one that sort of comes very naturally to me.
If you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
Well, for Scottish research, I'd recommend a book called Tracing Your Scottish Ancestors, The Official Guide, which is produced by the National Records of Scotland, and it's now in its 6th edition. And it's just, if you're going to be doing kind of that advanced research, particularly at the National Records of Scotland, it's the indispensable book that you need. Is
that book for sale directly from the archives, or can you find it on Amazon?
It's definitely on Amazon.
Okay.
I don't know how easy it would be to buy in the States, but you can certainly get it on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, here's a hypothetical scenario for you. You have to move to France, and you don't know anyone, and you're not familiar with the research or the record groups in that location. What are you going to do in the first month to hit the ground running and start a new genealogy business? You have the experience of, operating this business in Scotland, so you take that with you. So what would you do to get yourself up and running quickly?
So one of the things I try and do is to meet other professional genealogists. As I said, I have come to realize the value of networking. So I think just getting yourself known, other professionals, the archives, let them know what you're doing, any family history groups, that kind of thing. I think that's probably the most important thing you could do.
Do you think you have a personal habit that contributes to your business success?
I don't know. I think I find something interesting in everything that I do. So every case, every bit of research, there's always something interesting. And I think it's probably just enthusiasm and loving what you do that creates success.
Give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
My advice for anyone who's teetering on the brink of becoming a professional would be to just do it. Don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't or you're wasting all your time. I'd say it won't be easy, but if you're enthusiastic, you work hard, you love what you do, then you can be a success. My website is myainfolk.com, which is MYAINFOLK.com, and you can find my contact details there, and I'm on Twitter as Genealogy Girl.
Very easy to find you on Twitter, definitely. Well, Kirsty, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today. I so appreciate learning about you and your business and all the things that you've been doing to become a success. It's been great.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely to have a chat with you.
I hope you got a lot out of that interview with Kirsty Wilkinson. One of the things I love about doing this show is that regardless of where somebody is in the world, we have common experiences that are useful and beneficial for every genealogist, no matter where you are, whether you're in Australia, United States, Canada, Europe, wherever. And I think Kirsty's interview really represented that with some of the decisions that she made and some of the ways that she has focused her business. Now, of course, I'm not going to let you away without an action item. So here's what I want you to do this week. One of the things that Kirsty mentioned that I was so impressed by was that she advertised in an Australian magazine. Now, I'm not going to ask you to advertise in a magazine today, but I want you to give it some thought. And here's how I want you to think about it. Consider this. Kirsty lives in Scotland. Australia is like on the other end of the world. Yet she focused on that because she knew people in Australia have ancestors from Scotland. And so therefore, they're going to make potentially great clients. So she targeted Australia as a possible gold mine for future clients for her. Okay, so what I want you to do is think about who is it that is going to hire you? What is your specialty? And where is the most likely place that those people live right now who might need your service? Okay, so think about that first. And then think, is there a publication, perhaps a regional publication, that you don't know about yet that could be a potential target for you to advertise in to let people know that you can do research for them? Now, I'm not suggesting that you go advertising right now because that's a lot more involved than just, creating a quick ad. However, so what you should do is figure out how frequently that publication is issued. Is it quarterly, monthly, whatever? And then also find out about their advertising rates. That's really important. Is that something that you can afford right now? Or is that something you're going to have to budget and work towards? Being armed and planning is really going to help you advance in your career. So maybe advertising in a magazine is not an option this year, and maybe it's not an option next year. Maybe it's not an option that you want to do at all. But if you have that information, then you can plan and decide whether you want to incorporate that into your business plan at all. Also, the other thing, perhaps you want to target that magazine for articles and write some articles. And that's another great way to let people know that you are expert in a certain specialty. So consider that. Think about your specialty and look into where your potential clients could be and if there are any regional magazines there that might be a potential for advertising. All right, well, that's it for this week. I'm so excited because I am learning so much every week. I'm really enjoying talking to genealogists all over the world. I hope that you are too. If you're enjoying the podcast as much as I am, let me know. Leave a comment on the website, thegenealogyprofessional.com, or send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Until next week, so long.